All right, ladies and gentlemen, today I am doing J. Warner Wallace's job for him. J. Warner Wallace is from Cold Case Christianity. I'm going to play cold case detective. Now, I've never been a detective, but I did stay at Putnam County Jail last night. So, no, it's a joke. I didn't really. We're going to look at, Gary Habermas has the minimal facts for the resurrection case. I'm not going to get into all that. I want to look at one of the minimal facts that some people say isn't one of the minimal facts, but he says it is. Was Jesus buried in a tomb? This is the question we're going to look at today. I'm Steve Perry. This is Biblical Anarchy. So it's anarchy. We can say whatever we want, right? No, it's biblical anarchy. We got to base our argument from the Bible. So what we're going to look at today is two different accounts of the burial and see if we can figure out what happened here using a little detective work, right? And where would you look? You would look, if you're wanting to figure out what happened, you would look either at the tomb, which we don't know where it is. I'll get to that later. Or you would look at the last guy to be seen with the body. So we're going to go to Luke 23 verse 50. We're going to read 50 through 53. Now there was a man named Joseph from the Jewish town of Aramathea. He was a member of the council, a good and righteous man who had not consented to their decision and action, and he was looking for the kingdom of God. This man went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then he took it down and wrapped it in a linen shroud and laid him in a tomb cut in stone where no one had ever yet been laid. So this is a brand new tomb. Hasn't been used before. Joseph of Aramathea is the person who buries him. We get a slightly different, not contradictory, but a slightly different account in Matthew. When it was evening, and this is Matthew 27, starting in verse 57. When it was evening, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who also was a disciple of Jesus. He went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate ordered it to be given to him, and Joseph took the body and wrapped it in a clean linen shroud and laid it in his own new tomb, which he had cut in the rock. So we get slightly different accounts. Matthew doesn't bother to tell us that Joseph of Aramathea is a member of the Sanhedrin, called the council here. And he tells us that the tomb belonged to Joseph of Aramathea. We don't get that information from Luke. This isn't a contradiction. I'm not trying to present it as such. And remember, we're only looking at the historical case here for the resurrection, so there's no theology here. I'm not trying to get into that. Why do they give us slightly different accounts? Why does Matthew not tell us that Joseph of Aramathea is a member of the council? They both tell us it's a brand new burial place. But why does Matthew tell us that it belonged to Joseph of Aramathea and Luke doesn't? Well, if we jump over to Acts chapter 1, this is written by the same author as Luke. Acts chapter 1, we're going to start in verse 17. This is about Judas Iscariot, the one who betrayed Jesus. In verse 17 we read, "For he was numbered among us and was allotted his share in this ministry. Now this man acquired a field with the reward of his wickedness, and falling headlong he burst open in the middle, and all his bowels gushed out. And it became known to all the inhabitants of Jerusalem, so that the field was called in their own language Akeldama, that is, field of blood, for it is written in the book of Psalms, may his camp become desolate, and let there be no one to dwell in it, and let another take his office." So in Luke's account of the death of Judas, Judas takes the money that he got for the field and or for betraying Jesus, and he buys with it a field. He then goes to the field and apparently falls to his death. His guts burst open, so the field is called the field of blood. And these aren't just random events that happened. This was a fulfillment of prophecy from the Tanakh, from the book of Psalms. It prophesied that these events were going to happen, just as they happened, apparently, because that's the point of a prophecy. Now, if we go over to Matthew chapter 27, this is immediately after Jesus is convicted and before the crucifixion. He also talks about how Judas met his end. chapter 27, starting in verse 5. And throwing down the pieces of silver into the temple, he departed, and he went and hanged himself. But the chief priests, taking the pieces of silver, said, "It is not lawful to put them into the treasury, since it is blood money." So they took counsel and bought with them the potter's field as a burial place for strangers. Therefore that field has been called the field of blood to this day. Then was fulfilled what had been spoken by the prophet Jeremiah, saying, "And they took the 30 pieces of silver, the price of him on whom a price had been set by some of the sons of Israel, and they gave them for the potter's field as the Lord directed me." Interesting, right? We have two vastly different accounts of the death of Judas, and this often gets undersold by skeptics who say, well, how did Judas die? Did he fall to his death, or did he hang himself? Well, that's the tip of the iceberg, folks. Who bought the field? Did Judas buy the field with the rewards of his wickedness, or did the high priest and the council, the Sanhedrin, did they buy the field with the money that Judas rejected? Did Judas hang himself as a repentant sinner, or did he fall to his death in the field that he purchased with the money? Obviously unrepentant. These are two vastly different versions, and both of them claim to be a fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy. The how did he die, folks, is a minor tip of the iceberg. It's entertaining because you get into this thing with the apologists where, well, he hung himself and then he fell, but he fell headlong, which means the rope broke and then his legs hit a rock, which flipped him over, and he went like all the hoops they jumped through. It's mildly entertaining. I see why people do it, but it's the tip of the iceberg, and it makes me ask the question, why these different answers? Well, let's just go out on a limb here. If Matthew has the same story that Luke has, then what happens is he winds up putting a receipt for a potter's field, a burial field, into the hands of Joseph of Aramathea on the very day that they buried Jesus. Now, to be clear, every gospel account says that he's buried in a tomb. Paul has an account of the resurrection that doesn't include a tomb, but it doesn't rule it out. But all the gospel accounts say that he's buried in a tomb, and they all say he's buried by Joseph of Aramathea. But when we combine the accounts with the details that are left out from one account and added into another, when we combine them together, it turns out Joseph of Aramathea bought a field to bury indigent people in on the very day that Jesus is buried. So remember, this is not theological, making a historical argument. Why was there an empty tomb? Because Joseph of Aramathea never buried him in the tomb. He buried him in the field that he purchased. And yes, I have a bill of sale, and it just so happened that he purchased the tomb, or the field, for burial, a brand new place to bury people. It was not this type of field before. He purchased this field on the very day that Jesus was buried. It all adds up perfectly fine. From a historical standpoint, this would be the most likely thing that happened to the body. The problem with the tomb, how can we investigate the tomb? Well, we really can't. If you ask the Catholics, they have the tomb where Jesus was buried at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, right? The problem is we have dated this tomb, and it is only actually 1,700 years old. So the tomb didn't exist at the time of Jesus' crucifixion. And the 1,700 years old is kind of funny, because that takes us back to the date when Constantine, his mother actually, allegedly found the true cross in the burial place of Jesus. As it turns out, they must have made it themselves. This is when it was discovered, and this is when it dates back to. Now, we also have the Garden Tomb, which Protestants tend to think is the tomb where Jesus was buried. The problem with that is it's way too old to be a brand new tomb that he was buried in. So there's problems with both alleged tombs, and the reason why, I would argue, that, folks, historical case, this is not theological. The historical reason why we have such a problem is if we read the accounts and we read them together and we try to figure out what happened, the most likely answer is that Jesus was not buried in a tomb, but was rather buried in the field that Joseph of Aramathea bought on the very day that he is supposed to bury an indigent person. This all adds up. It works out quite well in my mind. Does it work out well in yours? Leave me a comment down below. If you enjoy the video, give it a thumbs up, share it on social media. But whatever you do, don't just sit there. Do something.